Well, for me, I think Roots was great. You know, and but I think all of us have experienced by some degree when you go have meetings in Hollywood today, they'll say, "Well, there's Roots. You know, we've done that. Been there, done that. We solved that problem. It's over. And Roots, if you got a problem, go to the video store and get Roots." You know? And that's you know, there's this. I think when Roots happened, there was a moment of we have to deal with this now, and they dealt with it, and now we can go away. And so I think we have to start looking at it more from the point of view of slavery is something that we should be able to talk about all the time. That it shouldn't be so difficult for us to talk about it as Americans. You know, you have to take some kind of ownership of the issue so that it's not this painful thing for all of us to come to terms with. Yeah, it was painful.
I think one of the things that I find is when saying you're going to make a documentary about Roots, because all of a sudden it's like, well, you're going to make a real story about slavery. And I think that in many ways, Roots, in some ways, kind of reinforced certain ideas about it that made it okay. And it was difficult, and there were difficult moments in it, but it also reinforced certain kinds of accepted ways that we wanted to remember slavery. And I found that whenever we were talking about then approaching the documentary, was always the question of, well, how's it, you know, some sort of, are you gonna reinforce that, or you're gonna start there, and really you're not starting there. We're talking Roots is in a very specific space. Number one, it reinforces certain kind of images and ideas about slavery, and we're talking about enslavement in this country that was, you know, hundreds of years, you know, and took many different forms as it moved through that, and so I found it at times it was a way to say, well, why do we need to do this again? We've been there, we've done that, everybody watched it. And the other thing was like, are you going to get as many people to watch yours as watch Roots? So does that matter? You know?
Yeah. I'll get with the Civil War. And I think the best example is where I live, Lawrence. You know, Lawrence, where the Civil War really began. John Brown, Missouri folks coming over to Lawrence, burning Lawrence down every other weekend, us going over to Missouri, burning their towns down. And then when, you know, Lawrence, where I live, was founded in abolitionism. You know, it was founded by abolitionists. But after the war, after we win the Civil War, Lawrence becomes segregated. You know, where I teach at Kansas University was segregated. And so, you know, you win the battle. So, you know, it's not the Mississippi Board of Education case that desegregates schools, it's the Topeka, Kansas Board of Education case. So, you know, segregation, which is slavery light again, is far much more a northern problem than we like to admit at times.
In the back?
I think that thinking, that line, that truth is a kind of great entry point for young people today. And I think it's part of the misconception or lack of knowledge that exists around slavery when you're talking to a younger generation. They see the brutality, they see the parts that they don't want to deal with. But at the same time, there isn't a kind of deeper kind of consideration of what does it mean for a nation to have this major contradiction at the core of its very origins. And how do you begin to think about the long-term effort it takes to unravel that, to move not just the institution that is a nation, but the people of the nation who then, in a certain sense, kind of accepted that. And so, yeah, in some way, young people say, well, why can't we just get past this? Why can't we just get over it? Well, certain things are not. There are no quick solutions, but they are part of a process. We didn't arrive at that moment of even at the moment of the revolution and the documents that in some ways set up and represent our nation and the reality of an unequal society or a slave and a free society. And while these documents are being drawn up, there's a long history before that. This is something that you know, you're talking about over 200 years before that of this reality. So I think that it's a great entryway. I think that's a point of entrance for a conversation with young people when talking about slavery. This is something, when I was studying slavery, it was never brought to me that way, that this is why we're going to talk about this. You know, this is why we're going to study this period. It was really much more of, here's a story about, you know, a time when people were slaves, and I went to an Irish Catholic school, and as soon as that was said, everyone looked at me as if I could tell you about slavery, you know, or I knew something intimately about it, you know. I think it's much more about that contradictions, a much more intriguing exploration, I think, even for young people in the classroom, something they can get their heads around, or they would like to get their heads around.
The work that she's done, is something that filmmakers ought to look at. But it also strikes me that there are some resonances that really matter today. She draws an explicit, and it's there in the documents and in who was involved, link between the New York's 1741 alleged slave conspiracy and the Salem witch trials. But what struck me reading it was the ways in which the social control mechanisms like curfews, like restrictions on young males gathering, that started as slave control measures and then became black control measures, are now everybody control measures. There's a direct link to the construction of the mechanisms for a police state, and it's a link that young people understand because they're already at the receiving end of that. And it seems to me that
in the Africans series is the early codes that come down to control, you know, the lives of enslaved people, and it's interesting if you look at those codes, and that's another great kind of tool for young people. You look at those codes and you compare them to things that you're looking at today, or experiences that they are having with authorities around their own freedom of movement or activity. It becomes quite interesting the way, how closely they are aligned to some of these early codes to control the slave populations. Yes.
Having heard what Kevin said about how question a bit, that I think that link between the question about our civil liberties today and how we are, you know, incarcerating so many young black men in particular, things like that, you know, that when the more you understand about peonage and the chain gangs and all of that, and the post-slavery kind of world, the more you see slavery in those images today. You know, in our film, we make fun of the movie, the TV show Cops. In our film, it's called Runaway. And the fact that we have all been conditioned to watch people arrested on TV, hauled off, you know, and that we looked at as entertainment. And that, you know, we tune in every week to see what neighbor is going to be taken away. And as if they're not us somehow. And so they've been able to divorce, we've been able to divorce ourselves from our community that way. And the fact that we've been conditioned to do that, it goes back to what you were saying about issues of freedom, because, you know, those are weird links toward, you know, how Hitler was able to take over and weird things like that. It's Guantanamo. It's all those things where you don't question why the person next door is being taken away, you know. And so, you know, again, slavery is informing all of that, you know. And I think when speaking to young people, I think you have to try to make them understand somehow that they're stake in all of this, you know. I mean, young people don't understand slavery and don't even really understand the civil rights movement. You know, there's been some huge disconnect from it all, as if none of it matters. And I think we have to find a way to make it real for people. And, you know, each of us are trying to make it real in various different ways. But it's difficult because, you know, if you don't watch PBS, you won't read a book about this. You know, you're not going to see it on TV typically, not on the shows that they watch. And when we were kids, we had 3 channels. Now you've got 562 channels, and you can watch only what you want to watch all day long. And so, you know, we had to watch all these other things, and so it's difficult to break that whole thing out of it. But I think you have to. The other thing, quickly, is that you have to get across to young people that freedom is a process. That you know, the civil rights movement, it took a long time for people to achieve those things. Same thing now, that it took a long time to end the war in Vietnam. It's freedom is a process. It's not that people are then freed and then you're there and then you go home and watch TV. You have to be willing, you have to be willing to devote yourself to, and the other part of it is you have to understand that you can't always win. That you have to accept that these stories oftentimes are tragic, that people lose oftentimes, and you have to be willing to accept the loss of history as much as you can take the victory of history. And that's the thing that Hollywood is not interested at all. But to understand freedom, you have to accept the loss of it, not just the victory.
I think we should.
I want to come back to this idea of open content. You could think about being in a classroom and you're making the images and the codes and all the information about slavery available. You could juxtapose it with what's going on today in young people. You know, you give them tools to create, to sample this work and to make new commentary around it. And I think and the only way it really works is if it has some way to connect to today. It's got to connect to today. And I think that this is such an interesting and important end product of all this work that we're doing, that you see up on the screen, because behind all these shows, there's like hours and hours and hours of content. How do we get this content out? Now, there's got to be somewhere where, in fact, in an educational and learning space, it's got to be available. And we've got to be all a part of making that happen. And how do you? And I mean, these bring in issues of policy and stuff. But but it's citizens that are going to make that policy happen. If it doesn't, the commercial sector is going to take control of those spaces that we take for granted. The internet, places like that. I think it's very important we pay attention to this, because these are the spaces that are going to have real impact on how our future generations learn and have the space and the opportunities to learn and to learn on their own terms.